In this talk, I will approach supervision from the point of view of the metaphor of space. As supervisors, we have a crucial role in creating a mental space and a dialogical space for our students to learn and work in. This space is something we build all the time. We cannot fix it through one session. It has to be built in our daily routines and encounters. PhD supervision is built in and through interaction. Unlike lectures and seminars, it's often conversational and spontaneous, and therefore sometimes difficult to manage and plan. I've often heard both supervisors and students lament, "I don't understand how our conversation turned out like that. I didn't intend that. It just sort of happened." So the freely flowing conversation is also an advantage. In supervision interaction, it's possible to design the activities to fit the needs of the participants. And it's also possible to enjoy the communication styles of the participants and to appreciate each other's personalities. I often ask supervisors in training what they value the most in supervision, and it's definitely this: having collegial, enthusiastic dialogue on research topics with their PhD students. In fact, this is at best a chance for mutual learning. How can we ensure that our interaction is natural and free, but also systematic and professional? How to design supervision talk to support the PhD students' learning and agency? I will introduce a model that will help you to design interaction on the run. It's based on my research on supervision and guidance interaction, and it helps you to focus and plan your interactions, but also to remain spontaneous and respond to your PhD students' needs. I will introduce 3 orientations that you will perhaps recognize in your own experience. And by orientation, I mean the line of activity that the participants follow in the interaction. These orientations occur in many supervision and guidance situations, and people shift between them in their talk. Both supervisors and PhD students can influence these orientations and cause shifts. So I will now make a few points about each of these orientations in supervision. In supervision interaction, advice and feedback are typical tools. A great deal of the talk is in fact supervisors' advice and corrective feedback on drafts. And yes, problem-solving orientation is useful and necessary for many reasons. The supervisor's expertise is put into use in relevant situations, that is when there is a need. Often PhD students' own advice requests or worries invite help from the supervisor, so the student is motivated to receive advice. And PhD students often view advice and feedback as support, without which they would not be able to proceed. But there are also vulnerabilities in the excessive or monological use of supervisors' advice and feedback. Firstly, some students' initiative activities do not call for advice so much as support and empathy. And sometimes students' advice requests are premature. The problems they offer are not yet ready to be solved, so the issue is deeper and requires some exploration. So responding to such questions with advice too hastily results in superficial advice for superficial problems. Advice and feedback are fundamentally problem-solving activities. The student has or student's work shows that there is a problem, and the supervisor's advice and feedback solves the problem. But this may lead to situations where it is the supervisor who points at the problems and the supervisor solves them. So the entire problem-solving cycle takes place in the supervisor's mind. And in terms of learning and developing agency, this is not beneficial. So the student should be involved in the problem-solving whenever it's possible. When most of the talk is the supervisor's advice and commentary, the student's understandings of the issue do not surface in the interaction. So there's a risk that the student does not understand the feedback. In the video about the path metaphor, it was mentioned that the key to supporting the student's process is keeping a contact with their understandings. So this should be kept in mind when using interactional interventions such as advice and feedback. So based on the above, we may summarize points about skillful advice. Listen to the student prior to providing your advice or feedback. Make sure the problems you are solving are relevant, and make room for the student's understandings on your feedback and advice, and be systematic in your feedback, both corrective and praise. Students often ignore praise and focus on the criticism, or they treat praise only as a ceremonial passage to criticism. So help them understand why good is good by providing argumentation. This is one way of developing self-efficiency and diminishing self-doubt. The above also leads us to important points about the other two orientations. Inquiry orientation is something we use whenever something needs to be understood, when the meaning, layers, dimensions, or dynamics of some matter or situation must be explored. For this, we need questions that invite the other person to tell and explain their thoughts and meanings. We may want to use open-ended questions. How did you work? What are your biggest concerns? What do you think caused this? Or we may just invite tellings. Tell me about your month. Walk me through your paper. When you want to make sure you understand, you may use follow-up questions. That is, questions that dig deeper and show you want to stay in the topic. Or you may use summaries. So I hear you saying that you have grown uncomfortable with this theoretical framework, or so on. Summaries or mirroring are useful in many ways. They signal active listening, they check and ensure understanding, and they have been shown to invite more specific talk from the other person. Inquiry orientation is helpful in gaining understanding of the work itself, but also of the views of the others. Sometimes this kind of talk is the only way to understand our own thoughts too. Supportive orientation is something we often miss, although many of us use these skills all the time without realizing that they too are an important supervisory intervention. Supportive orientation means showing verbally and non-verbally that we are available, that we are attentive, and that we are willing to receive what the other is saying and showing, that we are there for them. It's a way of putting our actions and attention to the service of the learning situation. And this can mean focus, being calm, attentive, and concentrating, and thereby helping the student to focus too. Emotional availability, tuning into what is at hand. If the student is, for instance, concerned or sad or fearful, we may show empathy and choose an appropriate way of responding. This way, we help them deal with their emotions. Willingness to face the facts of the situation. For instance, bad news about research. This way, we help the student to put their energy into dealing with the problem without having to worry about our reaction. This sort of orientation is especially important in openings and closings of situations and when there is something difficult to deal with. It's actually there all the time when people work together, but it becomes more obvious when things get difficult. Supportive orientation is often achieved through nonverbal means. Our posture, gaze, facial expression, laughter, softer voice. Sometimes we use verbal responses. We may, for instance, show that certain hardships are normal, that they are part of the research process and offer help in enduring them. Sometimes students are alarmed about relatively normal troubles because they do not yet have the perspective that would help them to normalize these issues. It's then the supervisor's task to show that there is no need to be alarmed, although it's okay to feel disappointed. These orientations shift in the interaction, and sometimes we find the students invite us to these orientations. For instance, they may strongly offer us the position of a problem solver while we wish to help them to become more self-reflective. Or sometimes they are very worried and invite supportive orientation from us. It is useful for a supervisor to recognize these orientations, and here are some tips how you can apply them in your work. Open the encounter with supportive orientation. Use inquiry orientation to see what should be on the table. If students have a lot on their mind, it pays off to collect the issues on the table and just explore them. And sometimes when the student has had a chance to talk about them all, they will observe new angles and perhaps find solutions, or at least inklings of them. This way, you will have time to consider your interventions and decide what sort of advice you wish to give. It's always good not to have to rush. Use problem-solving orientation only after listening to the student. Help the student to take part in problem-solving. And towards the end of the session, summarize, or even better, let the student summarize. So draw conclusions and action plans. Ask feedback from your student about the encounter and close the encounter with supportive orientation. These simple rules allow situational variation, and if you are a new supervisor, this model will give you time to think and takes away the pressure that you have to know the answer to all the questions right away. And as an experienced supervisor, this will give you a chance to benefit your student the most by making sure that the channel is open and they can understand you. Best of luck with your supervision interactions. Remember that your work is very valuable to your PhD student.